This is a true story about what happened a few years ago at UCC. There was this professor of philosophy there who was deeply committed to atheism. His primary goal for one required class was to spend one entire semester attempting to prove that God couldn't exist. His students were always afraid to argue with him because of his impeccable logic. For 20 years he had taught his class, and no one had ever had the courage to go against him. Sure, he had some kids who would argue from class to class, but no one had ever really gone against him. You'll see what I mean later. Nobody would go against him because he had a reputation. At the end of every semester, on the last day, he would say to his students, 300 of them, "If there is anyone here who still believes in Jesus, stand up." In 20 years, no one had ever stood up. They knew what he was going to do next. He would say, "Because anyone who believes in God is a fool. If God existed, he could stop this piece of chalk from hitting the ground and breaking." Such a simple task, and yet he can't do it. And every year he would drop the chalk onto the tile, and in the classroom it would break and shatter into 100 pieces. The students could do nothing but stop and stare. Most of the students were convinced that God couldn't exist. Certainly a number of Christians had slipped through, but for 20 years they have been too afraid to stand up. Well, a few years ago, there was this freshman who happened to get enrolled in the class. He was a Christian, of course. He's heard the stories from the professor. He had to take the class because it was required for his major. And every semester, he prayed every morning that he would have the courage to stand up no matter what the professor said or what the class thought. No matter what they said or did, nothing could ever shatter his faith. He hoped. Finally, the day came. The professor said, "If there is anyone who still believes in God, stand up." The professor and the class of 300 people looked at him shocked as he stood up at the back of the classroom. The professor shouted, "You fool! If God existed, he could keep this piece of chalk from breaking when it hit the ground." He proceeded to drop the chalk, but as he did, it slipped out of his fingers into his shirt cuff, into his pleats, down his pants, through his leg, and off his shoe. As it hit the ground, it rolled unbroken. The professor's jaw dropped as he stared at the chalk. He looked up at the young man, then ran out of the classroom to the lecture hall. The young man who had stood up proceeded to walk to the front of the room, and for the next half an hour he preached to that 300 students who listened as he told God's love of him, for him, and of the power of Jesus. If you believe in God, is it believing is seeing, or is it seeing or believing? Which one is it? Subscribe and comment and link to everywhere who you believe believes in God. This story is true. Do you believe it?